Welcome to our channel Learn for Clarity. Simplifying education for clear understanding. Today our topic is price elasticity of demand. Price elasticity of demand is a measure of the responsiveness of the quantity demanded of a good or service to a change in its price. It is calculated as the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. There are 5 types of price elasticity of demand. These are relatively elastic, relatively inelastic, unitary elastic, perfectly elastic, perfectly elastic. Let's start the discussion of these topics. Relatively elastic. Relatively elastic demand is a situation in which the percentage change in the quantity demanded is greater than the percentage change in price. In other words, a small change in the price of the product leads to a relatively larger change in the quantity demanded. This means that the demand for the product is sensitive to changes in its price. For example, let's consider a product like smartphones. Suppose the price of a particular smartphone is $100. If the price of this smartphone decreases by 10% from $100 to $90, and as a result, the quantity demanded increases by 50% from 1,000 units to 1,500 units, then we can say that the demand for this smartphone is relatively elastic. In this example, we can see that the percentage change in quantity demanded, plus 50%, is greater than the percentage change in price, minus 10%. This indicates that the demand for the smartphone is sensitive to changes in its price. Customers are likely to switch to other similar products or opt for an older model of the same product if the price of the new smartphone increases. Relatively elastic demand is often associated with products that have close substitutes, such as smartphones, soft drinks, and clothing. Consumers have many alternatives to choose from, and therefore, a small increase in the price of one product can cause a significant decrease in the demand for that product, as consumers switch to other similar products. In summary, relatively elastic demand occurs when a small change in price results in a relatively larger change in the quantity demanded, indicating that the demand for the product is sensitive to changes in its price. Relatively inelastic. When the price elasticity of demand is relatively inelastic, it means that the quantity demanded of the product does not change much in response to changes in its price. In other words, the demand for the product is relatively insensitive to price changes. For example, let's consider the market for insulin. Insulin is a life-saving medication used by people with diabetes to manage their blood sugar levels. The price of insulin is around $100 per vial. The demand for insulin is relatively inelastic because it is a necessary medication, and people with diabetes require it to survive. If the price of insulin were to increase by 25% from $100 to $125, the quantity demanded of insulin would not decrease by 10% from 1,000 units to 900 units. It might decrease by only a small percentage because people with diabetes need insulin to survive, and they are likely to continue purchasing it despite the price increase. Generally, products that are necessities or have limited substitutes tend to have relatively inelastic demand. For instance, prescription medication, gasoline, and tobacco are examples of products with relatively inelastic demand, as consumers may not have many alternatives to these products and, in many cases, may be willing to pay a higher price to continue using them. Unitary elastic. Unitary elastic refers to a situation in which the percentage change in quantity demanded of a product is exactly equal to the percentage change in the product's price. In other words, the price elasticity of demand is equal to 1, which means that a change in price leads to an equivalent change in quantity demanded. For example, let's consider a food item that has a price of $100 per unit. If the price of the product were to increase by 10%, from $100 to $110, and the quantity demanded were to decrease by 10%, from 100 units to 90 units, the product would be said to have a unitary elastic demand. Another way to interpret this result is that if the price of the product were to decrease by 10%, from $100 to $90, the quantity demanded would increase by 10%, from 100 units to 110 units. Again, This illustrates that the product has a unitary elastic demand, as the percentage change in quantity demanded is equal to the percentage change in price. Overall, a unitary elastic demand indicates that changes in price have a proportional impact on the quantity demanded of the product. It is an important concept for businesses to consider when setting prices and forecasting demand for their products. Perfectly elastic. Perfectly elastic demand refers to a situation where a small change in the price of a product leads to an infinite change in the quantity demanded. In other words, consumers are highly sensitive to changes in price, and any increase in price will cause them to stop purchasing the product altogether, while any decrease in price will cause them to buy an infinite amount of the product. A product that exemplifies perfectly elastic demand is a commodity such as rice or wheat. Suppose the price of a 50-pound bag of rice is $100. If the price were to increase by even a small amount, say $1, consumers would immediately shift to buying rice from a competitor offering the same product at the original price of $100. On the other hand, if the price were to decrease by even a small amount, say $1, consumers would buy an infinite amount of rice since the cost per unit has decreased, and they are highly sensitive to price changes. In such a situation, the price elasticity of demand is equal to infinity, indicating that the quantity demanded is infinitely responsive to changes in price. The demand curve is horizontal, indicating that the quantity demanded remains constant regardless of changes in price. The equilibrium price and quantity of the product are solely determined by the supply curve, as consumers will purchase as much of the product as is supplied at the original price. Overall, perfectly elastic demand represents a highly competitive market environment, where consumers have many alternative options, and suppliers have little to no market power to set prices above the prevailing market price. Perfectly inelastic. Perfectly inelastic demand is a situation in which the quantity demanded of a good or service remains the same regardless of changes in its price. In other words, when the price of the product changes, the demand for the product remains constant. The price elasticity of demand for a perfectly inelastic product is equal to 0. For example, consider a life-saving medication that costs $100 per dose. Patients who require this medication have no other alternatives and will pay the $100 price without any change in the quantity demanded, regardless of any price changes from $100 to $150. In this case, the demand for the medication is perfectly inelastic because the quantity demanded does not change with a change in price. Another example of a perfectly inelastic product is a unique work of art, such as an original painting by a famous artist. The demand for such a painting is unlikely to change, even if the price increases significantly, because there are no close substitutes for the artwork. In both of these examples, consumers are willing to pay the same price for a specific product, regardless of changes in its price. Therefore, the price elasticity of demand for these products is equal to 0, indicating that changes in price have no effect on the quantity demanded. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe our channel Learn for Clarity.